My sister-in-law poisoned my food to prove my deadly allergy was fake. My last shred of patience died right there. I've been allergic to shellfish my whole life, the kind where my throat closes up and I need an EpiPen within minutes or I could die. When I met my husband, James, I told him on our second date because restaurants were always tricky and I needed him to understand why I had to ask so many questions about ingredients. He was great about it, always double-checking menus, carrying backup EpiPens, making sure restaurants knew about my allergy. His older sister, Vanessa, was a different story. From the moment James told her about my allergy, she rolled her eyes and said allergies were just a trend people used to get special treatment. She said she'd never met anyone with a real one, just people who liked feeling important. I showed her my medical alert bracelet, my prescription papers, even offered to have my allergist call her directly. She waved it all away, saying doctors handed out diagnoses to keep patients coming back. The first few family dinners were tense. Vanessa would cook elaborate seafood dishes, then act wounded when I couldn't eat them. She'd say she completely forgot about my little allergy and huff around the kitchen making something else. James would bring safe food for me, but Vanessa would call it an insult to show up to her table with outside food. She started telling their parents I was using the allergy to control James, to make myself the center of attention at every gathering. She told anyone who'd listen that I was ruining family dinners with my pickiness. At a 4th of July barbecue that first summer, she made a big show of setting up a separate little table just for me, off to the side near the garbage cans, with a paper plate and plastic fork like I was a child who needed a kid's menu. She announced to the whole yard that she'd made room for the allergy, putting air quotes around the word with her fingers so everyone could see. A few relatives laughed. James didn't, but he didn't say anything either, and I remember standing there holding that paper plate, feeling my face burn, deciding it was easier to just eat a little and get through the afternoon than to make a scene. Looking back, that was the moment I should have realized how much ground I was already giving up just to keep the peace. Then she started testing me. She'd swear a dish was safe, then casually mention afterward that there might have been a splash of crab stock in the base, but since I hadn't dropped dead, I must be exaggerating. I'd panic, take Benadryl, and watch for symptoms while she laughed about how dramatic I was being. James would get angry, but Vanessa would cry that she was only trying to help me push past my mental block about seafood. She started hiding it in things, tiny amounts at first. She'd grind dried shrimp into spice blends, stir oyster sauce into vegetable dishes, sneak fish sauce into marinades. Every time, I'd feel my throat get itchy, my lips start tingling, and I'd have to take Benadryl immediately. Vanessa would say it was all in my head, because if the allergy were real, I'd be in the hospital already. She didn't understand that the small doses were staying just under my threshold for anaphylaxis, while still poisoning my system a little more each time. At Thanksgiving that year, she served a green bean dish she swore was just butter and garlic, and within 20 minutes, my lips were tingling and my throat felt tight enough that I excused myself to the bathroom to take a Benadryl and check my reflection for swelling. When I came back to the table, she was telling her cousins that I'd probably just eaten too fast. Nobody at that table knew what shrimp paste smells like cooked down into a sauce, but I did, because I'd grown up avoiding it, and I recognized the smell the second I sat back down, faint under the garlic, like she'd learned exactly how much she could add without anyone else noticing. James caught her once spooning something onto my plate when she thought no one was looking, and she said it was just a seasoning blend. We stopped going to her apartment for dinner, but she started showing up at ours with food she swore she'd made specially for me. I stopped eating anything she brought. She told the whole family I was refusing her food out of spite. At James's birthday dinner at a restaurant, Vanessa insisted on ordering for the table, saying she knew the menu better than anyone. She ordered me a risotto, swearing up and down it was safe. The waiter confirmed no shellfish. I was hungry and tired of the fighting, so I ate it. Within minutes, my throat started closing. James stabbed me with the EpiPen while dialing 911. At the hospital, the doctor said I'd ingested concentrated shellfish extract, enough to kill someone at my level of allergy if the EpiPen hadn't been used immediately. Vanessa showed up at the hospital playing the devastated sister-in-law, but the nurse was suspicious. She asked how shellfish extract had ended up in a dish that was supposed to be completely safe. Vanessa said the restaurant must have made a mistake, but the restaurant manager arrived with the security footage himself, terrified of being sued. The video showed Vanessa alone at the table for a few minutes, while James and I were in the bathroom. She'd pulled a small bottle from her purse and poured it into my food. The manager had kept the plate for testing after we left in the ambulance. The police were called. Vanessa tried to say it was just fish sauce for flavor, that she had no idea it would hurt me. The officer asked why she carried fish sauce to a restaurant. She said she always kept seasonings on her. He asked to search her purse and neither of us could believe what he found. Officer Trent Wallace reached into Vanessa's purse right there in the hospital hallway. He pulled out 3 small bottles, the kind with medical labels and precise measurements printed on the sides. He held them up to the light and his whole expression changed. He'd found concentrated shellfish extract, the pharmaceutical grade kind used in controlled allergy testing labs. Vanessa started backing away, but the officer kept going through the bag. He pulled out a spiral notebook with a black cover. He flipped through the pages and I watched his face harden with every one he turned. The entries went back nearly 3 years. Each one described a reaction Vanessa had documented after feeding me something. One read small dose in seasoning, subject reacted mildly, supports psychological theory. Another read increased dose in marinade, subject self-treated, no hospital visit, confirms mental block. There were more than 20 entries logging how she'd been poisoning me in careful increments to prove I was faking. Tucked into the back cover of the notebook was a folded printout of a message board thread titled, "How to Test If Someone's Allergy is Real," with Vanessa's own screen name highlighted in a reply describing exactly the kind of graduated dosing she'd been using on me, dated almost 3 years earlier. Officer Wallace photographed the page before bagging the notebook as evidence. And later that same week, when detectives pulled her phone records with a warrant, they found search history for shellfish extract suppliers, going back even further than the notebook did, along with saved receipts for 3 separate orders shipped to a P.O. box she'd rented under a slightly misspelled version of her own name. The officer looked up at her with open disgust. Vanessa's face crumpled and tears started rolling down her cheeks. She reached for the notebook, but he pulled it out of her reach. She said she was only trying to help me get over my fear of seafood. She said exposure therapy worked for phobias, and she'd read about it online. The officer cut her off mid-sentence. He said this wasn't a phobia. It was a documented medical condition with years of records behind it. He said what she'd done met the definition of attempted murder. Vanessa gasped like she'd been slapped. He pulled out handcuffs and told her to turn around. She started sobbing, saying this was all a misunderstanding, that she never meant to actually hurt me. He didn't care. He snapped the cuffs on her wrists while reading her rights. I watched from my hospital doorway as they walked her down the hall. She kept twisting back to look at me, her face red and streaked with tears, repeating that I didn't understand her. Nurses and other patients stopped to stare. James stood next to me with his arm locked around my waist, and I could feel him shaking. He came back into my room after they took her away. He pulled the chair right up to my bed and sat down, taking my hand in both of his. His hands were freezing and trembling. His whole face had caved in on itself, eyes red and wet. He said he should have protected me better. He said he should have cut his sister off years ago when the testing first started. His voice kept breaking apart mid-sentence. I was still shaky from the epinephrine and my throat felt scraped raw, but I squeezed his hand and told him none of this was his fault. I said Vanessa was an adult who made her own choices. He shook his head and said he'd known she was testing me and hadn't done enough to stop it. I reminded him we'd already stopped eating at her place. He said it hadn't been enough because she'd still found a way in. I didn't know what else to say, so I just held his hand while he cried. The nurse came in near midnight to check my vitals and said the doctor wanted me kept overnight for observation, since I'd absorbed an unusually concentrated dose. My blood pressure was still elevated and my breathing still sounded rough. The doctor came in an hour later with my chart and sat on the edge of the bed. She said the amount Vanessa had used could have killed me within minutes, and that if James hadn't used the EpiPen the second my throat started closing, I wouldn't have made it to the hospital. That made my stomach drop. She said the years of small, repeated exposures had likely made my allergy worse instead of better, and that I should plan on carrying 2 EpiPens from now on instead of 1. I wanted to scream. Vanessa had spent years quietly making my medical condition more dangerous, while insisting it wasn't real. My brother Diego showed up the next morning, having driven 3 hours through the night the second James called him. He took one look at me hooked up to an IV and burst into tears, then got angry almost as fast. He said he'd never trusted Vanessa, that something about her always felt off. He asked why I hadn't told him how bad the testing had gotten. I admitted I'd been trying to keep the peace for James's sake. Diego said that sounded insane now that I'd almost died, and he was right. I'd let her chip away at me for years because I didn't want to cause a family rift. He said from now on I told him everything, that he didn't care about keeping peace with someone who'd tried to kill me. 3 days later, I got a call from a district attorney named Elena Ford. She wanted to meet with James and me to walk through the charges. Her office had the evidence spread across a conference table, the notebook, the bottles, photos pulled from the restaurant footage. She said they were filing attempted murder and assault with a deadly weapon. She explained the notebook proved planning over time, and the pharmaceutical-grade extract proved intent. She said the case was strong enough that she felt confident about a conviction. James asked how long Vanessa could go to prison. She said attempted murder could mean 15 to 20 years, depending on the judge. It should have felt like a relief. Mostly, I just felt tired. A week later, James's father, Daniel, called and asked to meet at a coffee shop near our apartment. He looked like he'd aged a decade in 7 days. His face gray, dark circles carved under his eyes. He said he had no idea Vanessa had been doing this, that she always played concerned and supportive whenever he was in the room, but dismissed the allergy the second he stepped out. He said he was cutting her off completely, pulling every bit of financial and emotional support, and that he wanted to testify against her. James's face crumpled when his father said that, and I could see it breaking something in him, even as he said he understood. 2 days later, my phone rang from a number I didn't recognize. It was Vanessa's aunt, and she was yelling before I'd even said hello. She said I was tearing the family apart. She said Vanessa would never actually hurt anyone. She said I must have provoked all of this somehow, that I was being dramatic over a little seafood. I tried to explain about the concentrated extract and the notebook, but she talked right over me, insisting families forgive each other, and that I was being vindictive by pressing charges. I hung up on her, hands shaking. I realized there were people in Vanessa's corner who would defend her no matter what evidence existed. Elena called us back into her office 3 weeks later with the forensic report on the extract. She said it was medical grade, the kind that costs hundreds of dollars a bottle and has to be ordered through specialty medical suppliers, not something you can pick up at a store. Vanessa had gone looking for it deliberately, paid for expedited shipping, and signed a form acknowledging what she was buying. Elena said that proved proved this wasn't a moment of confusion. It was a planned, funded attack. I tried going back to normal life after leaving the hospital, but everything felt wrong. I'd make myself lunch and stare at it for 20 minutes before I could force down a bite, and even then my hands would shake through the whole meal. I lost weight fast. James called my doctor, who referred me to a trauma therapist named Dr. Adrian Voss. He had a steady, unhurried voice and never once made me feel like I was overreacting. He said what I was experiencing was a completely normal trauma response to being poisoned by someone I trusted, and that my brain was trying to protect me by making me afraid of food itself. He taught me breathing techniques for when the panic hit and gave me small homework assignments, like eating one meal a week that James prepared, working slowly back toward trusting food again. Meanwhile, James spent days calling every relative he could think of. His cousin Owen remembered a dinner 2 years earlier where Vanessa swore a sauce was safe for his tomato sensitivity. He'd broken out in hives within the hour, and Vanessa blamed the grocery store for mislabeling the can, though Owen later found the can in the trash with tomatoes listed plainly on the label. James's aunt told him about a friend with a severe dairy allergy who ended up in the ER after eating a dessert Vanessa swore was dairy-free, the cream cheese container buried at the bottom of the trash like someone had tried to hide it. A family friend named Priyanka, who'd known Vanessa since college, told James about a potluck 4 years back where she'd mentioned in passing that she was newly diagnosed with a gluten intolerance. Vanessa had laughed it off as a fad diagnosis and brought a safe pasta salad the following month specifically so Priyanka could get over it, swearing on the ingredients label that it was gluten-free. Priyanka spent that night doubled over in her bathroom and 2 more days unable to keep food down, and only years later, hearing what had happened to me, did she put together that the pasta in that salad had never come from a gluten-free box at all. James put together a list of 6 people across 5 years, every one of them dismissed as faking, every one of them sick after eating something Vanessa made. I was just the one who'd finally survived long enough to prove it. The preliminary hearing happened 6 weeks after the poisoning. The courthouse smelled like floor cleaner and old paper. I sat in the witness chair and told the whole story again, while Vanessa watched from the defense table in a soft blue sweater, looking harmless. Her lawyer asked if I had a history of being dramatic about my allergy. I said no. He asked if I'd ever exaggerated symptoms for attention. Elena objected before I could answer, and the judge told him to move on. Elena presented my medical records going back to childhood, 3 separate hospitalizations from accidental exposure over the years, throat closing, blood pressure crashing, EpiPen injections documented in black and white. Then she asked the judge if she could play a video. The bailiff set up a laptop where everyone could see. The footage showed our whole table, James and me getting up together, Vanessa left alone for a few minutes. She looked around twice to check no one was watching, then pulled a small bottle from her purse, unscrewed the cap, and poured it into my food, stirring it in with my own fork before slipping the bottle away and settling back into her seat like nothing had happened. The judge watched without a word. When it ended, he looked at Vanessa for a long moment and said the footage showed clear premeditation, that she'd known exactly what she was doing and taken deliberate steps to hide it. He ordered her held without bail until trial. James and I started couples therapy 2 weeks after the hearing. James kept saying he should have protected me better, should have cut his sister off years ago, and I understood the guilt was real, but I was also the one who'd nearly died, and I found myself spending half our sessions comforting him about his own feelings. Dr. Voss finally stopped us mid-session and said we were both victims of what Vanessa had done, in different ways, but managing James's guilt couldn't become my job while I was trying to survive my own trauma. He taught James to bring that guilt to individual sessions instead, and taught me to ask for support instead of trying to hold everything together alone. Elena called us in again with the forensic psychologist's evaluation of Vanessa. The report ran 40 pages, but the summary was simple. Vanessa showed strong traits of narcissistic personality disorder, genuinely believing she was helping people overcome limitations that weren't real, unable to accept that other people's medical conditions existed independently of her own experience. The psychologist said she would likely never accept responsibility, would always frame herself as the misunderstood one, which made her dangerous regardless of treatment. More relatives distanced themselves from Vanessa as word spread, but her Uncle Frank sent me a long, cramped letter in the mail insisting I drop the charges, that prison would destroy her, that family was supposed to forgive. Elena said flatly that it was witness tampering and filed it into evidence. 2 weeks later, the prosecutor's office offered a plea deal: aggravated assault instead of attempted murder, 5 to 8 years with mandatory psychiatric treatment. Elena laid out both paths honestly. The deal meant certainty and an end to the trial, but the full charge, if we won, could mean 15 to 20 years, and if we lost, Vanessa could walk away with nothing. James and I talked it through for hours that night, sitting on opposite ends of the couch with the takeout we'd ordered going cold between us. He kept turning the offer over out loud, saying a guaranteed 5 to 8 years felt safer than gambling everything on 12 strangers, that at least with the deal it would be over by winter. I understood the logic, and part of me wanted exactly that, an ending, any ending, as fast as possible. But every time I pictured signing off on aggravated assault, I thought about the notebook, the message board printout, the PO, box under a fake name. All of it built over years, not seconds, and the word assault felt like it was describing something smaller than what had actually happened to me. Around midnight, James finally asked what I wanted, not what I thought thought was smart or safe, just what I wanted, and I told him I wanted the trial to say attempted murder, because that's what it was, and I didn't want to spend the rest of my life explaining to people why the official record called it something softer. He nodded slowly, and I could see him settle into agreeing with me rather than just going along with it. I was exhausted and wanted it over, but I also wanted the record to say what actually happened. She had tried to kill me. We told Elena we were rejecting the deal. A victim impact meeting followed at a community center downtown, where I met 2 other women Vanessa had targeted over the years. One with a severe peanut allergy who'd ended up hospitalized after a safe family dinner. Another with celiac disease who'd been violently sick for days after a holiday meal Vanessa swore was gluten-free. Both had assumed it was an honest mistake until they heard my story. All 3 of us agreed to testify. Elena said the pattern would be hard for any jury to dismiss as confusion. The trial began on a Monday in October and ran 2 full weeks. Doctors, the restaurant manager, the forensic specialist, and each of Vanessa's other victims took the stand one after another. I testified for most of 2 days. Priyanka took the stand on the 9th day and described the potluck in careful detail, the exact wording Vanessa had used to insist the pasta was safe, the 2 days she'd spent unable to hold down water. The peanut allergy witness described how Vanessa had once told her, almost proudly, that she didn't believe in coddling people's food issues, a comment the woman hadn't understood the weight of until she was lying in an emergency room bed years later. The forensic accountant Elena had brought in walked the jury through the P.O. box records, the misspelled name, and the timeline of extract shipments, laying them side by side with the dates in Vanessa's own notebook so the jury could see how closely the deliveries lined up with each documented test. The defense argued she was a confused, well-meaning sister who never understood how serious the allergy really was. But Elena had the notebook, the shipping records for the extract, the security footage, and a documented pattern stretching back 5 years. The jury deliberated for 6 hours on a Thursday afternoon. When the foreman stood up and said guilty of attempted murder, the room went completely still. The judge sentenced her to 15 years with parole possible after 10, along with mandatory psychiatric treatment for the full term, and told her directly that her total lack of remorse made her a continued danger to anyone around her. Vanessa shot up out of her chair, screaming across the courtroom that I had destroyed the family and ruined all of their lives. The bailiff grabbed her arm as she kept yelling, dragging her toward the side door while she twisted back for one last look at me. I sat there watching her face contort with rage, and something inside me finally went quiet. James squeezed my hand, and we walked out of the courthouse together.